course, he's the great Paul McCartney.
Welcome to Expert Minutes. I'm John Hambone McGuire.
This conversation
Sweet, juicy. Where did that word come from?
I don't know.
Bet you never thought you'd hear that on the radio.
Welcome to the show. I'm Graham Mack, and Podcast Radio, as you know, is a radio station that plays podcasts, and we're on DAB. We're on in London, Manchester, Glasgow, Birmingham, and we're online everywhere else in the world. And I host a show called The Pod 20, which is a countdown show of the top podcasts in the world. And I get to talk to some of the top podcasters in the world. And I've got one of them with me now. The audio will be cut up, but if you're watching this live, or if it's the delayed highlights on YouTube, no, it is the actual uncut version on YouTube. This is the behind-the-scenes look at how these interviews get put together. And Tom Bell is the host of Tom's 5-Minute Podcast. How are you, Tom?
I'm all right, thanks, Graham. I'm good. And thank you very much for the invite. It's greatly appreciated. Brilliant.
Not a problem at all. Now, we could get into some serious topics here. I don't want you to hold back. If there's anything you want to say, just say it. You're a former public sector manager and whistleblower.
Yep.
And you've been campaigning for change in the way Britain's public services are run. What is the problem in Britain's public services?
What is the problem? Right. God, what a great question. There's no pressure there, is there? I bet you didn't ask Lorraine Kelly this question.
No, last week we didn't actually mention British public services, no.
Well, look, so last year I wrote a book, and this is a book I wrote. It's called Lions, Liars, Donkeys and Penguins, The Killing of Alison. And it's about the events surrounding the suicide of my sister Alison after she was abused in the care of an NHS mental health hospital. And it will be, on the 13th of December this year, it will be 30 years since she took her own life after that period of abuse. And we are still trying to get justice. And at the moment, we are still trying to get a fresh inquest. And we have an appeal currently with the Attorney General's office to try and grant us that new inquest. Because at the time of Alison's death, back in 1991, when the original inquest was held, none of the facts leading up to what had occurred were actually known. And worse than that, Graham, they'd been hidden and covered up. And what we've subsequently had, what we've experienced from public services over the last decades, has just been a catalogue of crap. You know, it's like umbrella theory. You know, public services are there and they look all smashing and smiley, but when you need them, it all falls down. You know, and we've been lied to by the National Health Service, we've been lied to by the Crown Prosecution Service, we've been lied to by the Police Service. Nobody has just got hold of this issue and actually dealt with it. And here's the thing that I think will amaze viewers of the YouTube channel and listeners to the podcast. The guy actually finally admitted in 2017, he finally admitted what he had done to Alison when she was in the care of the NHS. And
he was a nurse, wasn't he? And
yeah, he was having a nurse. He
was having a sexual relationship with her, and she was in the care of the mental health hospital, right? He
had groomed her when she was an inpatient, and he had sex on the hospital premises with her, unprotected sex. What he did led to Alison experiencing what's called a crisis abortion, and staff at the hospital, including this guy, then arranged a pregnancy termination, which was kept from her records. Can you get your head around that? They kept that from her records. And the people that did that continued to work in that hospital. Nobody was disciplined. Nobody lost their job for it. And the work, the investigative work that we've done over these years reveals a culture within that particular NHS hospital that was absolutely broken and bereft of compassion. What is amazing is that he finally admitted in 2017 what he had done under caution to the police. And I've got to say, at that point, you know, I was punching the air, because after decades of trying to reach that point, we finally had a confession. The police had taken us seriously. They had reopened the investigation, which they failed to a number of years ago. And this guy finally admitted it. And then do you know what the CPS said? The CPS said, it's not in the public interest. So this guy's on record, right? I have a juvenile criminal record for pinching fags from a mobile shop, right? This guy had sex with someone on a mental health hospital premises. He is responsible for
someone he was supposed to be caring for.
He was supposed to be caring for her. It is actually classed as statutory rape, and this guy doesn't have a blemish on his record. And I just find that absolutely incredible. If the abuse of patients in public hospitals isn't in the public interest, what is? What are we left with? I mean, the CPS, they were prepared to take all this information from people who had no substantial evidence and try and prosecute and persecute Cliff Richard. By the way, I'm not a Cliff Richard fan. Loathe his music, but I'm sure he's a smashing chap. But he had helicopters flying over his house without a shred of evidence. And there's us, as a family. We've got a guy who's confessed to what he's done on multiple occasions. We've got all the records showing that a pregnancy occurred, that a termination was arranged. And then we have a vulnerable young woman who took her own life as a result of what happened to her. And no charges are brought. Apparently it's not in the public interest. I don't know if... I've never met anybody who can get their heads around that decision, Graham.
All right. Well, let's get back to the question then. Because you were a whistleblower because you ended up bizarrely at one stage in your life working for the NHS, and you saw in the part of it, because it's a massive thing, but in the part of it that you worked for, you witnessed some of the culture that was the same kind of culture that you think caused the cover-up. What was it? To get back to the question, what is the problem with the way that the British public services are run? I mean, I want to get down to, is it bad people or is it bad systems?
No, it's bad systems. Don't get me wrong, there are always going to be bad people in every section of society. And there's a really interesting stat. He would say that, wouldn't he? There's a really interesting stat that I'll pull out the hat just to illustrate that point. If you took all the public sector employees in the UK together, and you stuck them in one city, right? You'd have a city of just over 5 million people, yeah? If you then apply Office of National Statistics crime stats to that city of 5 million, yeah, you'd have a homicide rate, as the Yanks call it. You'd have a murder or homicide rate of 55 people per year, yeah?
Okay.
And in terms of crimes committed, you'd have 500,000 crimes, that's 10,000 every week, committed each year. Those would include things like fraud, theft, rape, burglary, domestic violence, assault, yeah? So my point is that things will happen in public services just as they happen in other parts of society, because the people that work in the public sector are just a mirror of society. They're no different. They're not angels, nor are they devils, but they are a mirror of society. But what they find themselves in is bad systems which perpetuate bad behaviour. And the area of expertise that I deal in when I'm talking to people and organisations that are willing to listen is we talk about this thing called willful blindness, yeah? And willful blindness is it goes under many names. Moral myopia, motivated blindness is another. And essentially, the question you're asking is it bad people or bad systems? You can't deal with the bad people, right? Because when we say bad people, these are people that do bad things. I guess whether we call them bad people or not that's open for discussion. Mm-hmm. So you're going to have those things happening anyway. The problem, though, is that what the public sector does is it amplifies their behaviour, and it provides a host, if you like, a breeding ground for bad behaviours. Because when people do the wrong things, when people are involved in harmful practices or deceitful practices, those things aren't called out. And so the culture starts to perpetuate. And again, I'll bring this to life for you. When I've been speaking to people that used to work at the mental health hospital that Alison was abused in, right? I've done a lot of digging, a lot of spade work over these years. Yeah, I've met people in pubs, I've met people in hotels, in dodgy locations all over the place who don't want to be named. Some of them are happy being named, but many of them just wanted to talk and say, "Look, Tom, I've heard what's going on with you. I'd like to share things with you, but I don't want to go on the record." And they've admitted to me that the rape of patients on wards was often unreported. Yeah. I've got a former manager who tells me that a number of people reported being raped on their watch while they were a manager on a mental health ward. I have a former patient who was on the ward opposite Alison who says that it was common practice for staff to have sex with patients. I also have somebody who said that in their experience, and I've only got their word for this, Graham, but in their experience, some of the staff, the less sensitive staff, and that's me being polite, regarded sex with patients as a perk of the job.
Right.
That's
So
what we're dealing with.
So you're saying, like in any large group of people, there are always bad eggs. But
Absolutely.
if the system's at fault, what stops people coming forward and calling it out then? Because if they don't do that, they're enablers. What is there in the systems in Britain's public services that stops people calling it out?
There's a number of things, really. I think one of the main things is the treatment of whistleblowers. So if I use my own case as an example, when I worked in the private sector, I worked for a large drinks company. Yeah, I think it was one of the best jobs I ever had. Probably, dilly do. And the people that were at the top of that organisation wanted to know what was happening at the front lines in the marketplace. Yeah. And the reason they wanted to know that was, and the company was, of course, Carlsberg, but they would come out with the trade people like myself. They'd come out to talk to customers, and they'd spend time talking to people to understand how they could improve, how they could get better. And the reason they did that was quite simple. It was the sustainability of their own jobs, and it was profit on which they were judged. Yeah. In other words, you have to succeed in the marketplace. Yeah. And so what happens in the private sector is, don't get me wrong, it doesn't happen everywhere. You know, we've got terrible examples of banking and other things where people have turned a blind eye, yeah. But in the private sector, it doesn't pay you to turn a blind eye to things that aren't going well, because the marketplace will find you out. If you're Carlsberg and the quality of your beer is terrible, and people are telling you that, but you ignore it, yeah, you just pop your fingers in your ears and go, I can't hear you, yeah, then actually people will start to drink other products. You'll lose your market share to your Carlings, to your Fosters, to all those other things, yeah? In the public sector, there are no rewards for doing well, and there are no penalties for failing. So if I come to you and I say, let's imagine you're my director, yeah, and I come and I say, hey, Graham, you know, I've just been talking to some service users of mental health services, as we used to do, and they're really unhappy with the way things are run, yeah? They don't like this, they don't like that. They feel that they are marginalised. They feel that services aren't available to them that they need, and they feel that they have to travel a long way to access mental health specialists. Yeah, so some, let's call them, legitimate concerns that people have. Now, in the private sector,
and these people are people who are wanting to make the service better.
Absolutely, because you know, when we talk about whistleblowers, they're just truth tellers, and I would call a whistleblower a market researcher, because all a whistleblower's doing is he's saying to you, here's an opportunity to improve. If you get this bit right, you can get better. Now, the problem is that my mentality, because I worked in the private sector since leaving school, well, since being kicked out of school unceremoniously, I have to say, but my mentality has always been that you can succeed in the private sector by doing what the customer wants you to do. It's the customer that pays your wages, yeah? And I always remember that as a salesman at a young age, customers would remind me, Tom, it's me that's paying your wages. So you get it right with them or you don't get paid. It's pretty simple. In the public sector, there's no direct relationship. So your bank balance sits over here in the public sector, yeah? And there's no direct relationship between that and a delighted customer. Because actually you're not that bothered about the customers or the service users. You're just trying to keep the regulator happy, keep the funder happy, meet your targets. We call it chasing the target and missing the point, yeah? You just want to keep them happy, because keeping them happy keeps them off your back. If the service users are complaining, it doesn't matter to you. You know, it's the equivalent of the people that drink the beer for Carlsberg. If they were all saying this beer is terrible, you just ignore them, because they've got no choice about where they get it. Right. And so what you've got in the public sector is you've got the lack of this competitive. I'm not a privateer, by the way. You know, I'm a paid-up socialist. Let's get that out now. But and I love the NHS. I think between me, my mum, my nan, and my auntie, we've got just over 100 years' experience of working in the NHS. As a concept, it's bloody wonderful. You know, there's if you met an alien who landed on planet Earth and said, "Show me an example of this thing you call civilization, Graham," you'd probably take them to the concept of the NHS and say, "This is it. We all throw a few quid into the pot so that when one of us needs it, we get it, because none of us can afford a hospital in our own back garden." Yeah. Yeah. Do you see where I'm coming from? You know that I think it's a wonderful example of humanity at its very best. I don't just think it's about Britain's best. I think it's a wonderful human example. But the problem is that what we've got now is a lot of public sector servants who have succeeded just by chasing the numbers. You chase the target, yeah. So we have this guy that came to Cumbria a couple of years ago, right? And he gets awarded a CBE, right? You know, he's appointed as chief executive. He's on 250,000 a year, and he gets given a CBE for his services to healthcare, right? Yeah. Great. At the same time as he's in charge of that hospital, it pays out tens of millions of pounds in compensation to the families of patients who have been harmed and killed in its care. Now, the bit about him getting his CBE, that's the bit that goes in the paper, because the public relations team, that's the bit they send out, yeah?
Yeah.
The bit about the tens of millions of pounds of yours and my money, right, that's just been pissed up the wall, yeah?
Yeah.
That doesn't get in the paper.
Yeah.
Right? That's hidden. You can only get that with a freedom of information request. So what you've got is this strange machine which concentrates on hitting the numbers. It doesn't matter about the customers. You just hit the numbers. Now, here's where the mismatch comes, because if you take nurses as a great example, a lot of people are going to nursing are called to that as a vocation, aren't they? They are actually really caring people. And again, I've got to say that because, you know, my mum, my nan and my gran, they all talk about a time where they saw it as caring before counting. And they all remember the introduction of NHS management as being a terrible thing as far as they were concerned, yeah? And I think to some degree they're right, because managers that are removed from the front line and who have no sense of the customer's needs, the service user's needs, they're not really adding a great deal of value. All they're doing is enforcing these targets that come down from above, yeah? Keep the regulator happy, keep the government happy, keep the departments happy, keep the funding coming, and if we get bad reviews from people, so what? You know.
So what happened when
you ask
you
what was wrong? There's a whole lot of things wrong, Graham. But don't get me too much on my soapbox because you never get me off it. But there's a whole lot of things wrong. But that is a great part of it is the culture. There's no accountability. You know, if
from
you're
your
a director of a
experience, then,
firm,
well, let's get down to an example of what you noticed. So you're working for a particular part of the NHS. Can you say which bit?
Yeah, I was working for something called the Cumbria Partnership NHS Foundation Trust, which provided mental health and community services in Cumbria.
Right. Now, this was after your experience with what had happened to Alison as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
so you knew what could happen if it went horribly wrong?
Absolutely, which is why my mouth got me into trouble, because...
So what happened? Just tell us what happened and how you were treated when you brought these things up.
Okay, so let me give you a real example. So I came in with a private sector background into the health service, yeah? And one of the first things I did was, because I had responsibility for looking after how, in the public sector, Graham, they have a posh name for them, they call them stakeholders, right? How all the stakeholders viewed the trust, right? In other words, all the GPs that referred into services, yeah? All the voluntary organisations that referred into services, and, you know, people like housing associations and adult social care. So I worked with all those people, yeah? And we've got 83 GP practices in Cumbria, around about 350 to 400 doctors, yeah? So my job was to go out and talk to these people about how we were doing, yeah? So coming from a market
So that was
research,
your actual job, was to find out exactly how you were doing. Regardless of these targets and stuff, you wanted to find out from the people who were using the service, get their feedback on what's the kind of service they were getting.
Absolutely. So I would talk to people, mental health advocacy groups, patient representative groups. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I think I don't think they realised who they hired when they hired me. That's the first problem we had. So I think what they thought, because I turn, you know as you do, you turn up with your grey suit on, don't you? Your best suit, nice tie, and at an interview, right, when you need a job, because you must remember here, I thought what had happened to Alison had been a one-off.
Right.
Do you see what I mean? I never assumed that the culture of the NHS was so broken.
Right.
So I went for this interview in 2012. Sorry, I went for the interview in 2011, and it always brings a smile to my face when I say this. I think Alison I don't believe in the afterlife, Graham, but I got the interview and succeeded in the interview on the 20th anniversary of her death. And it was kind of as if she was saying, I'm going to get you in a situation here where you won't be able to forget me, right?
Right.
So I get this job with the NHS, right? And I've got to tell you, I was so chuffed to join the NHS. I went to this induction early in 2012, right? There's about 50 people in the room getting inducted. You know, we're all getting sheep dipped into the NHS. And the chairman started speaking. I don't remember what he was saying, but I just remember starting to clap. I was like a demented seal, yeah? Because I thought, you got to remember, I was kicked out of the house on my 16th birthday, juvenile criminal record, you know, thrown out of school I worked my arse off to get my MBA and to get my master's in marketing and all that crap. And so to finally get a job with the NHS in a responsible job, middle management role in the end, I thought, Tom, you've arrived. This is fantastic. You know, you have arrived, mate. Brilliant. Yeah. You can now add some value to the party. This is good. And you know what? It's funny. I used to look at the courthouse where I got sentenced for all my juvenile offences. I used to look at that right from the office in the NHS. Yeah, I could see that. And I remember one day the JCBs came to knock that down. and I was cheering out the window. Honestly, I felt like this is fab. Life doesn't get any better. But anyway, sorry. So I'm there, right, and I get into this job, and I think they've hired someone that's going to tell them what they want to hear. Because, as I say, corporate grey suit, MBA, all the bollocks, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think they knew that they'd hired someone with such a strong moral compass. And I'm not taking the credit for that or saying what a lovely bloke I am. I have a strong moral compass even, because I kind of have to. Because if you've been through what we've been through, you don't sit back. Do you know what I mean? You can't just watch. You can't watch shit unfold without acting on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, if you combine that with a private sector background in sales, where you're only as good as last month's sales, right? You're only as good as what you do, what you bring in through the door. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got stuck into this job, and I constructed this survey, right? So marketing, I'm a member of the Market Research Society. I've been a chartered marketer for 20 years. I put this survey together, take it out to all the GPs. Oh my God, they loved it. GPs were finally being asked what they thought, right? And they did not hang back. Jesus, they did not hang back. The response rate was around about 50%, which for a survey is phenomenal, right? And the results of that survey were that less than 1 in 10 of the GPs on the patch thought that the trust understood their needs, was responsive, and was reliable. These are healthcare services we're talking about, right? So less than 1 in 10 of the people that referred their patients into services thought it was any good. When I took those results back, they were just brushed under the carpet. I said, look, this is an opportunity to improve. These people are telling you what matters to them. And I was told that we would never be allowed to repeat that survey. The results were doctored, and the charts on the colours on the charts were changed, right? So that people thought we were, it was all about reputation management, yeah?
Yeah. And
I'm sitting there thinking, this is bollocks. I've been hired into a job where I was told it was about improving things, and I'm giving them feedback, this is data, this is empirical data. This is, if you're a marketer, that's gold dust, isn't it? These people are actually saying, if you do this, you'll improve. And they just weren't interested. And then I think the thing that really swung it for me was that a young girl called Helena Farrell, who reminded me a lot of my sister, she had kind of same photogenic, understated Hollywood looks, red hair. She was a talented academic. She was musically gifted, just like Alison. She took her life and she hung herself in the woods behind a hotel in Kendal. And one of the reasons that she did that was that she'd been failed by the child and adolescent mental health services, who said that she didn't pose a suicide risk.
She was an outpatient, wasn't she? She
was an outpatient, yeah. She was an outpatient. And needless to say, she very clearly proved that she did pose a very strong risk. And the trust dropped the ball. Now, we all make mistakes, right? We're all 99% chimp, 2/3 water, with billions of neurons flying around in our brain, right? We're going to make mistakes. We're going to fuck up and drop the ball from time to time. But what I saw the trust do was, I couldn't live with it. What the trust did was it focused entirely on managing its reputation. It was just bothered about what the press and the regulators would say. It never spoke about I was sat in meetings with people and nobody was speaking about the family. Nobody's speaking about the tragedy that's just unfolded. They're all talking about, how do we manage our press releases? How do we manage our reputation with the regulators? And it was I just thought, this is a human tragedy that's just unfolded on your watch.
And you've been in a family that's gone through a very similar thing. You know what it's like from the other side, and you're not getting any of that empathy coming through from the people who were responsible, or to try, not necessarily directly responsible, but responsible for this. I mean, it's a failure, isn't it? They've got to admit they failed, and they should be looking at, how did we fail and how do we reduce the chances of this happening again? And you're telling me they were looking more at how do we cover this up and make it not look as bad as it was, and how do we distance ourselves from this, in effect?
Absolutely. That's the trick. That was the trick. And I mean, they actually went to the levels of, and it's easy for me to sit here, and I might sound like a conspiracy theorist, so forgive me if I do, but all this, I can evidence all this stuff. They actually went to the lengths of concealing reports which had shown that the child and adolescent mental health services were inadequate and unfit for purpose. When this case went to the coroner's inquest, the coroner was never shown those reports. The family were never shown those reports.
So evidence was withheld?
Oh man, yeah. And and being brutally honest, I'm sure that happens much more than we like to think it does. Because and it and I know it's really difficult for people to say, well, that must mean that they're all bad people. They're not. Genuinely not. I've sat down and had coffees and meals with a lot of these people. They are just trapped in systems that do not allow them to behave any differently. Because the way whistleblowers are treated, the way people that break ranks are treated.
So what happened to you when you called them out on this then?
Oh man, I was basically gaslighted and bullied, and I found myself at one point I was doing the work of 5 people. Right?
What? So they were just they were swamping you,
dumping stuff. So my role was changed. I was removed from that role, and there's another story for you there. But I was removed from that role. I was absorbed into another team. I was bullied, belittled, questioned, all the classic tricks. So, bear in mind,
constructive dismissal, they call it, don't they?
Yeah, and do you know what? They handed me out on the grounds of, because I had to take time off with depression, I was then handed out on the grounds of ill health. Here's the best bit for you. A month after I'd left that NHS trust, I got a letter apologising for putting me in an untenable position. The problem is, by then, it's me that's out of a career.
Yeah.
So I lose a career in the NHS where I felt I could make a positive difference because I was put in an untenable position. Now, I should stress, I never received a penny compensation for any of that. I was just hounded out of that career, and that was that. And that's a real bummer. I mean, and that's putting it politely, because I got into the NHS, and I said I was clapping like a demented seal at that, induction. I was so proud to be part of this thing, because as a concept, it is wonderful.
I think in your book, I think you say you should never meet your heroes, don't you? That's how you described it. You were so disillusioned by it. That was what it felt like.
It totally did. It really did. It was as if me and Dorothy and the rest of the gang had got to the end of the Yellow Brick Road, pulled the curtain back. There was the wizard, and he was a total wanker. And it's like, fucking hell, what happened there? That was tough. But what then took me to the point of suicide myself was that when you realise that the world doesn't work the way you think it works,
right.
The good guys don't win, There's nobody coming over the hill to rescue you. The cavalry aren't there. The police aren't going to help you. Everybody's going to do everything they can to forget the case of your sister. You're going to get hounded out of your employment, and you reach this point where you think, bloody hell, this is a bag of shit.
Yeah.
And they say, when people used to say to me, Tom, what doesn't kill you will make you stronger, I used to literally feel like punching them, because I thought, you have no fucking idea what it feels like to be me right now. I do not feel strong. Now I feel a bit like one of those, those Japanese plates, right, that gets broken and then gets remade with the gold dust and the glue. They call it kintsugi, don't they?
Yeah.
So the plate is actually stronger afterwards, and in some respects more beautiful. But you're just not welcome at the dinner table with the other plates, right?
Yeah.
Because you look odd. And I sort of feel a bit like that now. I feel a bit kintsugi. I do feel stronger. I feel more comfortable in my own skin. But it's just a shame that people like me, that we don't feel comfortable in places like the NHS. And we should. Yeah. That's exactly where people like me should feel comfortable. But as soon as we start to challenge people who want to talk about targets and measures and reputation management, really, just, we deserve better than that, don't we?
Now, this reputation management thing, you've said that when you worked out what had happened to Alison, you thought it was an isolated case, and then you witnessed something very similar in the part of the NHS you were in, and you're saying this is going on all over the NHS, all over Britain, in most of the regions, if not all of the regions. This reputation management, does that explain why? I've worked in broadcasting for a long time, and I worked for the BBC for a while. And I know several people who used to work in BBC newsrooms that now work for the NHS. Is that why? Are the NHS going out and deliberately recruiting journalists to write and rewrite stories so it covers up some of their failings?
It's the straight answer to your question is that I don't know whether it's a deliberate act to hire those people, but what you've got is this wonderful circumstance for the NHS where you know yourself that the media has been struggling, hasn't it, over the years? Yeah, we've lost a lot of journalists' jobs. Yeah, we've lost a lot of local papers. Yeah,
local papers are on their knees. Yeah,
absolutely, and
and local radio hardly exists either. Yeah,
absolutely. So places like Radio Cumbria, which used to employ a whole load of staff at their place up in Carlisle, they're on a skeleton staff now, effectively. Great bunch of people, but they're on a skeleton staff. So what you've got is this need for the NHS to manage its reputation, suddenly with an availability of qualified journalists who kind of know how the system works. Yeah, and the PR. I don't think PR has a role in public sector. You and I are experienced enough to know what PR originally was. Yeah, PR is the nice name that was given. Well, yeah, it was propaganda, right? And PR took a leaf out of its own book and rebranded itself, right? Because weirdly, after Nazi Germany, propaganda had a bad name. Work that one out.
Got a lot of bad press, didn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it did. So let's rebrand it PR, public relations. Utter bollocks. It's nothing to do with public relations. It's about telling people what you want them to hear. Yeah. So what you find with PR is, don't get me wrong, I'm sure members of the PR Society and the PR Society itself would disagree with that, but that's the reality on the ground. If your status and your income and your job and the kids' school fees and all the rest of that stuff depends on your salary, and you are employed in a role on a decent whack of money, which means
big pension.
You've got to protect, absolutely, decent pension, all that stuff. You've got to protect the reputation of the directors that you're working for and of the trust that you work for, then you will keep banging those good news stories out, regardless of whether that's reality or not. If you come back to that example of the guy who costs the NHS tens of millions because of his crap leadership, but is still awarded a CBE, I think actually what we should do, in the public sector is we should defund PR, right? And we should put that money into something called information departments, not PR departments, information. Now, the difference would be that the information departments would give you data, right? And that data would be comparable with all the other public sector organisations that are doing the same thing, yeah? So rather than me having to do a freedom of information request to find out that my local trust has just pissed up 30 million against the wall in compensation claims, yeah, I should be able to look straight on the website and see that. And then I should be able to see how that compares per capita, right, with every other trust in the country. And I should be able to see how much people are on. And I should be able to see the level of complaints. And I should be able to see the levels of mishaps and the quality of services. What I shouldn't be dependent upon is this kind of PR team just throwing these good news stories over the wall every now and again. Classic one, isn't it? Photo of nurse with patient that they've helped and gone the extra mile with. I went out in the snow. Look, great, that's great. Don't get me wrong, that's fab. Yeah. But I used to go out in the snow selling telephones. So if you can't be asked to go out in the snow to deliver healthcare, then I wouldn't think that much of you, frankly. So it's kind of, can we just get past all the crap and the bollocks? Imagine in the private sector, right? If Toyota came out and said, "Oh, we've got this new advert. What we're going to do is we're going to say 99% of our cars are bloody effective, bloody reliable." Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Only 1% of them crash, right?
Yeah.
We'd be going, what the hell? We expect your cars to work perfectly. In fact, if you have a 0.001% failure rate, then you're going to do like 100,000 car recall, right?
Yeah.
But the failure rates in the NHS are through the roof, but they still just keep cheerleading and going, there's nothing to see, everything's good over here. Just come on, just can we have an honest conversation about the problems that you're facing? Because we all know you're facing them. The only people denying it are you.
Yeah.
But you asked the question,
the thing is, though,
still going on?
Is it still going on, and how widespread is it?
Yeah, okay. So I did a presentation at the National Patient Safety Congress in September, and it was one of those events where you have to be quite polite, obviously, and you can't sort of say perhaps some of the things that you might like to say about the culture that causes these issues. But I had people coming up to me afterwards, that I've known from my previous life in the NHS, coming up to me afterwards and saying, "Tom, that was great to see you, but do you know what? Things are worse than they were when you left the NHS."
Wow.
And if you look at what's going on, so last year, Baroness Cumberledge released her report into the NHS, which she said the NHS, now this is in 2020, right? So we're talking recent history here. Yeah. She said the NHS is still not learning from its mistakes, right? This year, we had a report from MPs which suggested on the low side that 1,000 baby deaths a year are avoidable in our NHS maternity services, simply because of the cultures that exist which don't allow people to speak up and talk about the mistakes that have been made, right?
Right,
I should stress, at this point, by the way, I should stress, I'm not one of those bastardy types that wants lots of people sacked. I actually believe in forgiveness. And people are going to think I'm totally soft now, but I actually wanted restorative justice for the man that abused Alison.
Right.
I wanted to look across the table at him, because we are all just 99% chimp. We're all just trying to figure it out, right? And everyone's going to drop their bananas from time to time. But it's what we do next that defines us as human, isn't it? It's how we deal with those things. And so I believe in forgiveness. And I believe people in public sector services should be able to put their hands up without fear and say, I've dropped the ball here.
Yeah.
I've dropped a clanger. I've given the wrong medication. I've made a serious mistake. Do you know what? Yeah, it was me that was having sex with that person on hospital premises. Now, that's an extreme example. Yeah, I get that. But we need to create cultures where that kind of wrongdoing is just not tolerated. Partly, on the one hand, because there is a climate that says you can admit what you've done, yeah? If it's a genuine, well-intentioned error, you can admit what you've done, yeah? And then on the other hand, we don't tolerate that crap, yeah? In other words, where it's illegal and it's amoral and it's harmful and deliberately so, we need to get to a point where people are saying we just don't tolerate that crap. Because,
but at the moment, people have no idea what's going on because it's all being covered up. If it was more open, then there would be more incentive for people to get it right. There's nowhere to hide then.
Well, you make a great point. And so here's an interesting real example for you. Do you remember the mid-staffs inquiry, the Robert Francis report? Yeah,
with the babies. Yeah,
mid-staffs is kind of etched onto all our collective memories, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it was estimated that between 400 and 1,100 people had died avoidable deaths in the care of mid-staffs hospitals. And we've got to thank Julie Bailey. She campaigned tirelessly to get that recognised. But nobody was ever held accountable for that, right? So just get your head around that. 400 to 1,100 people, avoidable deaths, right? The chief executive walks away with a payoff, yeah? Nobody loses their job. Nobody's ever held accountable, right? The chief executive didn't even have to turn up at the inquiries in person. He was allowed to video call in because he was feeling a bit down with himself, right? So one of the things that Francis recommended after that had occurred, he said, let's introduce standards for NHS directors. Let's make it so that if you balls up in one part of the NHS, you can't just trundle off to another part of the NHS and make a mess there, yeah?
Because that happens, doesn't it? It's a lot like the Catholic priests. They move them to another parish. Yeah. Absolutely.
And we're all kind of sick of it, aren't we? And, you'll see it occasionally in the news where somebody's, they're rehired immediately after being sacked, yeah?
Yeah.
Partly as a pension fiddle so they can claim the pension and all the rest of that stuff. And then they move into another well-paid post. If you're in the private sector and you balls up as a director, if you bollocks the company's finances up beyond repair and rip off the shareholders, then you're struck off as a director.
Yeah.
You can't just reappear, can you, as a director of another company and say, hi, I'm here again. Yeah. It doesn't work that way. And I think that's great. So Francis recommended that this be introduced into the public sector, yeah? 5 years after that was done, that by the way, happened in November 2014. That act came into force in November 2014. 5 years after that, not a single director has ever been found to have been found not fit or proper, yeah?
Not a single one?
Not a single one.
Out of how many are there, roughly?
Thousands.
Right,
tens of thousands.
Right, so not
tens
a single
of thousands.
One. Yeah.
And Robert Francis was forced to admit last year, and he's on the record as saying this, he was forced to admit that his idea to introduce a fit and proper persons test for NHS directors was itself not fit for purpose. And a whole national review was done. Now, and it's kind of weird and it's kind of funny, isn't it? Because it's almost as if we expect it to cock up.
Yeah.
In other words, we're just kind of used to it. And what shocks me is that we're no longer shocked.
Yeah.
This stuff goes on and it's like, well, imagine if 400 to 1,100 people had died individual deaths as a result of poor care that was given to them, right, by a named carer in the community.
Yeah.
Imagine that. There'd be 400 to 1,100 prosecutions.
Yeah.
Wouldn't there?
Yeah.
Nobody get away with it.
It'd be like a Harold Shipman kind of a situation, wouldn't it?
Nobody would get away with it. Yeah. But it happens in one hospital, and nobody's held accountable. All those people lost their lives avoidably. I mean, and you've had Gosport since then, haven't you? You've had infected blood. Now, my point is not that the NHS is terrible, because as I said again and again and again, I love the NHS. I love the concept of a National Health Service. But it's got to start owning up to where it drops the ball. Because that's, you know what, that's the only thing that's going to make it sustainable. And if I tell you and the listeners that the current bill for liabilities for the NHS, the current amount sitting on the balance sheet for liabilities for compensation claims is approaching 85 billion, that's billion with a B, 85 billion pounds. And last year alone, £2.5 billion was paid out in compensation claims.
And that's taxpayers' money that could be used to pay for
you
care.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
You nailed it. So the cost of failure is not just the 10,000 plus people and the 1,000 babies that die avoidable deaths in its care every year. By the way, they're just the ones we know about. And that for me is the major cost, right? But the cost is not just in those lost lives, those damaged lives. It's in, we're making the health service unsustainable because we're not allowing it to admit its mistakes. We've got to reach a point where we go, do you know what? Yeah, we accept that mistakes will happen. But so we've got to put that alongside forgiveness, and we've got to have accountability. And I think the two things can sit alongside each other. But until people are willing to just put their hands in the air and go, yeah, something's got to change here, something's got to stop. Every NHS director that comes in, Simon Stevens was the last one, wasn't he? And he's now been replaced by his successor, who was his deputy. His mantra, the remit he was given by Jeremy Hunt, who was then in charge, was protect the reputation of the NHS. Now, that's a noble aspiration. The problem is, by the time it gets translated into action, protect the reputation of the NHS becomes hide the shit.
Yeah. And a lot of people listening to this will hear parallels for other things. And the one that, when I read your book, that immediately sprung to mind, and you cover it in the book, was the Hillsborough situation and the cover-up with another big organisation. In that case, it was South Yorkshire Police. So is this every large British public service has got these issues?
Yeah, they're all failing us in this respect. And when they do what they do well, it's great. They just don't have the capacity or the flexibility to admit when there's a mistake. It's like never admit you've done something wrong. And then, so I call it the cock up to conspiracy continuum, which is probably very unfortunate in for me to use that. But what happens is, so let's take the case of, let's take Hillsborough for a good example, People are told to adjust their record books and their logs of what happened,
Change evidence, change statements.
Change statements, change evidence, Nobody resists, right? Because you're looking around you, right? And if you're in a room of 20 people that are all being told to do that, who's going to blink first? Who's going to put their hands up and say, Governor, I'm not doing that. That's bullshit. Because that's your family around you, isn't it? And this is the problem with the public sector. It treats its people like a family and not a team, right? So in the private sector, if you're underperforming or you are duplicitous or you're causing harm, you're identified, you're assessed for training needs, and then if you're not fit for purpose on that team, you're on the transfer list. You're off the bus, And it treats you more like a member of a team, because in the private sector, you've got to perform like a team. In the public sector, what happens is you get treated like a family. It's a bit like where, you sit around the family dinner table and there's certain things you don't talk about, and we never talk about Uncle Frank's flashing down the park, or Auntie Vera's alcoholism, because those are just taboo. We don't talk about those things, And what we need from the public sector is to start to behave much more like a team and a lot less like a family. Because you're right, it would be wrong to say that everybody in the public sector is bad. But what would be right to say is that they are all susceptible to the same forces. And sometimes, they just have to turn a blind eye because they're absolutely powerless. I mean, I'm not condoning what those police officers did, but put yourself in their shoes. 20 people, for example, hypothetical situation, stood in a room being told to alter their record books because, the fucking chief constable wants it. And this is the way it's going to be, and we've got to protect the reputation of this police force, and it's for the greater good, and blah, blah, all that stuff that you get told, all the standard mantras, trotted out. It's going to be a brave person that says, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. But how do we fix it then? You say accountability and to have information available online. How else? Because they do end up, in the case of the Hillsborough situation, they ended up investigating themselves. I think it was the West Midlands police investigated them and found nothing to see here. When, further down the line, we knew there was a lot more to it, and there had been a cover-up and a conspiracy. So what, with the NHS and the police and other big organisations, what can be done? Should there be a separate board that oversees them? That's got nothing to do with the organisation and no dog in the fight.
Yeah, I mean, I would personally like to see community control for a lot of our services. Now, people kind of chuckle at me when I say that because they say, let me give an example. I'd like to see more community control over our health services, yeah? So, because if we're prepared...
And what does that mean? What's that look like, community control of the health service?
So let's look at how a jury works, yeah?
Yeah.
So I've done jury service once, right? Roped in off the street, literally. 12 people, citizens, good and true and all the rest of that stuff. And we become the ultimate decision makers about a really important decision involving people's lives, yeah? So we are trusted with the dispensing of justice. And I'm not great on I love some of the philosophers' statements. I'm not great on them. I can't remember these from memory, Graham. But, all the great philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, they all talked, didn't they, about the importance of justice. Justice was a prerequisite for everything. Martin Luther King said, without justice, there can be no peace. So justice is the cornerstone of our societies, and the perception of justice is the cornerstone of our societies. So if communities and lay people can be trusted with that kind of responsibility for jury service, why can't we be trusted, actually, to govern police services, health services, adult social care services? That whole reputation management piece just needs to be consigned to the dustbin of history. There should be no room for public relations within any of our public sector organisations. We don't want public relations departments. We want information. Yeah. Now, you can't. When we talked earlier about changing people's behaviour, we're talking about a generation's work here. This is not going to change overnight, because what you've got is a lot of people at the top of the tree now who made their way to the top of the tree by emulating the behaviour of the people who reached the top of the tree before them. And they did the same for the people before them. Yeah,
it's modelling, isn't it? That's how you get on, is you model successful people. And
absolutely. I saw you do this. I'm going to do the same. If they pay attention to that, then I'm going to pay attention to that. So rather than having these top-down imposed targets and measures, which frankly mean nothing to you or I, right? For example, have you ever come out of your GP surgery, or has your wife ever come out of a GP surgery and say, "Oh, Graham, that was a seamless integrated care experience"? Fuck off. Right.
Yeah.
They either dealt with you effectively or they didn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so all this, the measures that they're measured on mean nothing to you and I, right? Well, why can't we define the value that we want to get from these services?
Yeah.
I think the police service failed me. The Hillsborough families know that the police service failed them.
Yeah.
So in other words, they defined the value. They said, "No, you failed us." And then the police kept going, "Nothing to see here, nothing to see here." Yeah.
Yeah. And you had exactly that with Alison, because you were doing a lot of the investigation, and you were finding evidence. In the book, you talk about when a policeman came round to your house, and you completely stumped him because you had the goods and they didn't, or said they didn't.
Well, they bullshitted me completely. So these two guys come round. So we're going back 2015 now.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get them to reopen the investigation, yeah? Because my experiences in the NHS that we talked about earlier, they have started to get me thinking that the way Alison was dealt with was not upfront, yeah?
Right.
In other words, I'm starting to think that just as Helena Farrell's family were kind of reputation managed at an arm's length, yeah, I'm looking back at what happened to Alison, and I'm starting to realise that's probably what happened to us. And we were too naive to even know it, right? Because you don't know what you don't know, do you? You just expect these public services to be staffed by good people with good intent who will treat you honourably and with integrity. And actually what you find is that that's not the case, because they're not rewarded for dealing with you with integrity. So you're absolutely right. It's exactly what we found out. And these two coppers came around the house, and I said, I'm thinking about trying to get you guys to reopen this investigation, and I just wanted to have a conversation with you about it and blah, blah, blah. I should have realised, by the way, when they sent two fairly senior coppers round, that there was a rabbit off, yeah?
Yeah.
And this guy sits there and he says, he's done all the empathy training, Graham. So, he's done the courses, and, he's looking at me, looking at me in the eyes, and he's going, Tom, there's nothing to be gained from reopening this investigation. It was a good quality investigation, and I can personally vouch for the quality of the officers that undertook it. And then I said to him, I said, well, okay, that's fine. I said, can we have a look at some of the evidence that you have within the file that you've got? And he said, well, I can't show you that because of data protection, right? So I had it ready. I had my scheme ready. I said, let's play evidence top trumps. I said, I've got a file of evidence here that I've kept. I know that you can't show me what's in there because of data protection. So I'm going to pull out a file. And if you've got a matching one, you say. Right? 30 pieces of evidence later, he hasn't got a single matching one. Everything that I gave them back in 2000, when we first found out what had happened, had been lost, mislaid, as they called it, right?
And this was like evidence of the forced abortion and all, like really serious, hard
Serious
stuff.
stuff.
Yeah.
Serious stuff.
Yeah.
Medical notes, copies of the
Yeah.
pregnancy termination certificate. And at this point, so I said to him, I said, okay, right, so a few minutes ago, you told me this was a good quality investigation. What do you think now? And he looks awkwardly at his mate as if to go, fuck, we've just been rumbled. And I said, I'm going to look into this as a matter of urgency. Again, looks me in the eyes. I'm going to look at, great, okay. So 4 months pass. I've been sending him an email every month saying, what's happening next? 4 months pass and I get a reply. No further action will be taken. Yeah. And if you make a complaint about the way the investigation was dealt with in 2001, we have the right to dismiss it because it's longer than 12 months ago. So they call it disapplying. It's a really polite way of saying get stuffed, yeah?
Yeah, and all we have to do is run the clock down and we're off. We're out. We're out. Yeah.
They can disapply your complaint.
Yeah.
Unless you have compelling evidence to the contrary. Well, thankfully, those 30 documents that I had, that was pretty much what I needed. So I remember driving to police headquarters one day with that stuff, and I filmed myself delivering it to them, to the reception desk, yeah, and putting it on the table, and I filmed the receptionist, and I filmed the date, you know, all the classic stuff with the newspaper and that, you know, to say when I'd done it. And I said, right, there's everything. There's everything. Now, are you still going to disapply my complaint? At which point they begrudgingly acknowledged that there might be something they should look at.
And this is all because of this reputation management stuff. All because of that.
Now they would say, it's a time issue, Tom. We're struggling for time. So therefore, we couldn't commit resources to dealing with your issues because, yeah? And okay, you kind of get that. But if the police commissioner at the same time is publishing a strategy that says they will take reports of historical sex crimes seriously, yeah, then that's just words, isn't it? Because if what they're doing is saying, we'll disapply your complaint because it's older than 12 months, and then so you ask them to join these dots. You say, hang on, the police commissioner's strategy says this. You're saying that. What's the crack here? And of course, those kind of emails and those questions, they never get answered because they're the awkward questions, yeah? And they don't have to answer that stuff. So eventually they said, right, okay, we will launch an internal inquiry into the quality of the first investigation.
So they'll mark their own homework.
Absolutely right. Now, here's what I've got to tell you. At this point, I was thinking, you're marking your own homework, guys. History's going to repeat itself. You're going to say nothing to see here, and you're going to fob me off. Do you know what? That internal report, they couldn't dress it up. It was so bad.
Really?
The things it revealed were so... They hadn't even filed an investigation report or logged it. They hadn't spoken to the last person to see Alison alive. They hadn't spoken to her friends and relatives, yeah, details of whom had all been given to her. They hadn't sought her medical records from any of the 3 NHS sources that we gave them. They hadn't spoken to British Transport Police, who were there, obviously, in the aftermath of the incident at Rotherham Railway Station. And they hadn't even spoken to the Coroner's Court, who had all the original records from the first inquest. So they were forced begrudgingly, their position changed from a good quality investigation undertaken by 2 sound police officers to front page of the Guardian online having to apologise for an inadequate, what did they call it? They never used the word failure, do they? It was like, you know, it was a something. There was a...
Yeah. There's
you know,
double speak, isn't there? Yeah.
Absolute double speak, yeah, you know.
Yeah.
And you just look at that and you think, you absolute bastards. When you came round and you sat in my house and you told me that it was a good investigation, you already knew that it wasn't. Because if you'd seen that case file and looked at it before coming to my house, you already knew that nobody had been spoken to, that you hadn't even logged an investigation report. In fact, you only came round to my house to clear your desk and fob me off. And do you know what, Graham? I still get angry about that. I still think you absolute bunch of tossers. What were you doing? How does somebody sit in your own home and look you in the eye and lie to you like that? And that's when I think you cross. You asked earlier if it was bad people or bad systems. I think that's where the line starts to get blurred between people protecting reputation and actually behaving fairly explicitly and personally dishonestly. So, did that guy really need to come here and lie to me? I don't think so. I think I deserve better. I've been a tax-paying citizen since 1066. I deserve better than that.
And the Crown Prosecution Service weren't much better, were they?
Absolutely not. But here's another thing for you. How many people would have believed that copper?
Oh, yeah, because he's a policeman. And a senior policeman at that. Oh, yeah. Yeah,
I'm sorry to have bothered you. I'm sorry to have bothered you. I can see you did your best. And then we get to the CPS, right? And so what actually emerged from the police's own internal investigation, which they promised to give me a copy of, and because it was so bad, they then withheld from me, right?
Wow.
Yeah, I had to get the Information Commissioner's Office to release a copy to me. Do you know what I mean? Like, come on, guys. Haven't you? This is the best bit, Graham. They put you through hell and then make the hell worse. It's not as if there's any pity or compassion there that says, fucking hell, this guy's already lost his sister to suicide because she was abused. Yeah. And now we're making it worse. Do you know what I mean?
No shame. Yeah.
Yeah. So we get to the CPS, and it turns out that the CPS had never been given a full file to look at. It turns out that the CPS had originally told Cumbria Police to revisit the file, which Cumbria Police never told me. The Cumbria Police just told me that the CPS had said no, right, in 2002. So then we get to the CPS, and we eventually get to this point where Cumbria Police have interviewed somebody. As I say, 2017, he finally admits what he's done under caution, yeah?
Yeah.
And, my older sister Sarah and I, she's been incredibly supportive in all this, we were whooping the air. We were, oh man, it was, Jesus, I was just...
It's a confession, yeah.
Yeah, and we were like, we had kicked the can down the road, and I mean that in a positive sense. We had moved this seemingly immovable issue, right? Crossed all these barriers and bridges, and I'd make it sound like they were easy things to do, and they weren't. I mean, I was in the pits of depression at the time. My whole life was falling to bits. I was being hounded out the NHS for whistleblowing, and still trying to pursue all this stuff. And you think, man, we've done it. We've fucking only gone and done it. This is just, God, the feeling. And then for the CPS to turn around and say, yeah, we understand that he has acknowledged his crimes, but we don't think it's in the public interest to prosecute him. Man, do you know what I mean?
It's not funny, yeah.
But you've got to laugh. Honestly, the only way I've kept my head above water, Graham, is by laughing. Yeah. Dark humour has kept me afloat, I'm telling you. Yeah. Because it is, and here's this will blow your brain, right? So we turn up for a meeting with the CPS, right? So we appeal. Originally, the CPS said, it's not in the public interest. And I said, right, can we appeal your decision? And the CPS said no. So I said, well, hang on a minute. I'm looking at your guidelines for appeal here, and we fall under 2 of the 4. No, you don't. Yes, we do. No, you don't. Yes, we do. Are you ready for this? This went on for a month. Every week they say, no, you don't. Now I'm going, yes, we do. End of a month. Oh, yeah, you do.
And it has to be said as well, along the way, that you, in your spare time, out of your own pocket, are chasing this, just you and your sister, whereas the police and the NHS and the Crown Prosecution Service have got almost a bottomless pit of taxpayers' money to fight this, to save their reputation, and it's something that needs to be exposed. But you two on your own.
This is one of those things that just makes you want to scream, right? Yeah. So they've got their own legal department, right? As you say, bottomless pit, yeah? All it takes for them is for a manager to walk into the legal department's office and say, I need a bit of help managing this, yeah? Yeah. This is, this is me, right? In my loft, in a terrace house in Penrith. I love it to bits, by the way. But, I've got my old printer, sort of a few stamps.
But they've got a team. Yeah.
I've got 4,000 emails in my inbox, right? I had to change my computer recently because the other one was crashing, yeah. And you're right, they've got a team, and if they need a new computer, they just order a computer. Thank you very much. I'll have that out the public purse, and then they're paying their solicitors out the public purse. So not only are they exacerbating my hell, but they are charging me for doing it.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, how do you know what I mean? We had to crowdfund just to get the money to get the appeal together for a new inquest, right? We had to crowdfund that money, £8,000, because I didn't have it, my sister didn't have it, and because the Crown Prosecution Service have effectively now closed the door on a trial. What they've said is that's not going to happen. So even though we told them that we had the right of appeal, which they then acknowledged we did, 6 months after that they said, right, we've not accepted your appeal anyway, right? So then we arranged to meet them, because I thought I have to meet these people, I have to meet these wizards behind the curtain that are making all these crappy decisions, right? So these two people come up to Carlisle to meet us, both called senior Crown prosecutors. God knows what the juniors are like, but that's another story. So these two senior Crown prosecutors have got this massive dictaphone machine on the table, something that came out the ark, right? And they're trying to get this thing working so we can record the meeting, yeah? And I think they deliberately they couldn't work it. It's too hard to work. So I just pulled this up-to-date digital dictaphone out of my pocket and said, don't worry, I'm recording it anyway. Stuck that on the table, right?
Yeah.
And so 2 hours later, right, we're no further forward. And when we sat there with the Crown Prosecution Service, do you know what the senior Crown prosecutor said to me? This is as true as I'm sat here, because it's on tape. She said to me, it seems to me, Tom, that the only thing he did wrong was have sex in the wrong place.
Right.
The only thing he did wrong was have sex in the wrong place.
Because they were trying to make out that it was a consensual relationship when Alison, who's got mental health problems, was in no fit state to give consent to anything, really.
Absolutely. It is effectively statutory rape. But here's the thing for you, right? So we'd said to the CPS in the run-up to this, we'd said, are you sure you've got all the evidence and expertise that you need to understand what the impact of this would be? And we even introduced them to a wonderful professor, a lady called Janet Melville Wiseman, she's kind of an expert on the power dynamics between health professionals and patients, yeah? Because you're in brilliant territory here, Graham. This is all about power dynamics, yeah? So not only was it what he did illegal and immoral and a lot of other things, but she couldn't consent because she was mentally ill. She was actually there for her protection when he groomed her, yeah? So she was supposed to be safe from the outside world, right? And for them to say it was a consensual relationship, it's kind of like they've been reading Mills and Boon as their reference material, yeah? You know? And we said to them, look, do you understand the issues here between a health professional and a patient? Do you need us to help you access the expertise you need to deal with this case properly, right? Because that was important to us, that they got it right this time, yeah? And do you know what they said to us? They said, we've got all the expertise we need in-house. No need to worry. No need to worry. Right. So we finally get this decision. And then when you realise this woman's actually sitting there saying to you, all he did was have sex in the wrong place, which is kind of like, it's a bit like, let's imagine your missus, right? She gets run over tomorrow, right? Bloody well hope that never happens to any of us, right? But they get run over tomorrow because they're in a 20-mile-an-hour zone, right? Pedestrian zone, yeah? And someone drives through them at 50 miles an hour, right? Imagine that driver, he stands up in court and he says, don't know what all the fuss is about. All I was doing was 50 mile an hour in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Hang on a minute, mate. You know, oh yeah, but 50 miles an hour is legal on the road over there.
Yeah.
You know, that's basically what they were saying. And I said,
do you think they actually believed that, or that was they were just trying to get you to back down?
Scary thing is, I don't know. I honestly don't know. Is it malice or is it incompetence or is it just a heady cocktail of the two? I really don't know. But we then decided, okay, right, it seems that they don't have the knowledge that they need. So we wrote to the CPS and said, you know, in polite terms, because by this time, we've actually realised now that the horse has bolted. We are never going to get a prosecution for Alison in a court. Because even when we said to the CPS, can we crowdfund a private prosecution based on the evidence that we've got and the fact that he's admitted it, yeah? They said, their words, not mine, there are cases where we can intervene and stop a private prosecution happening, and this would be one of them. Right. So they even stood in the way of a private prosecution. We have no idea why that is. So we send off a freedom of information request to them, right? Saying, please give us details of the database and the knowledge and the academic research that you use to inform your decision making. Yeah,
Because they've said they've got the expertise in house. They said
they've
it.
got it. They said it. Oh, we can't give you that, data protection. So what do you mean data protection? Well, there are individuals and stuff named on it. I said, well, I said you can redact the names of the individuals. I said all I'm actually asking you for is, I said, imagine you work in a university library and somebody says to you, can you give me the references for that source of knowledge? That's what I'm asking you for. I'm not asking you to give me somebody's home phone number and details. What I'm saying is, give me the names of the papers, the books, the documents, and the sources of knowledge that you refer to when you're making these decisions. Oh, no, we can't give you that. No. Right. So we go to and fro through the appeals process, as we do, right? We then go to the Information Commissioner's office, yeah? The Information Commissioner says, I support Mr. Bell in this. Please provide him with the information that you said you had. At which point, they are forced to admit they never had any such information.
But once again, there's no consequences.
No consequences.
They've said we've got it all worked out here. We've got the people and whatever, when they didn't. But there's no consequences. And it seems that if what you're saying about public services in the UK and how they like to cover up and reputation manage, if you're dealing with the police, the NHS and the Crown Prosecution Service, you've got now, there's three major organisations with reputations to protect. And you wonder if they were colluding with each other to cover each other's arses now, don't you?
Well, this would, I was talking to you about this continuum from cock up to conspiracy, yeah?
Yeah.
Somebody makes a mistake over here, right? And then what happens is it's covered up a small degree, yeah?
Yeah.
And then it's covered up a little bit more because somebody asks a question. So the lie grows, do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's a bit like, so if I said to Debbie, Debbie, I was late in tonight because I was at work, right? But actually I've been to the pub for a few pints, yeah? Mm-hmm. I have to build that lie, don't I? What I've then got to do is ring round my friends, right? And say, Graham, if
anyone asks you.
Yeah, Stuart, if anyone asks, right, okay. Yeah. So at that point, you've then got to probably say to your partners, if Tom's missus rings up, right, you have to say, I was in the pub, yeah?
Yeah.
So then you extend it and you go to the pub landlord, right? Just, if my missus asks, right? And so from this little thing that occurred, which is just a human error, right, that someone didn't admit, it might be well-intentioned or it could be malicious, whatever it was just one thing that happened, right? It grows. And so it gets to the stage where somebody then has to start ringing the wagons, yeah?
Yeah.
We've got to circle, somebody's asking too many questions, so we've got to circle the wagons, right?
Yeah.
So that lie grows. And the problem is everybody then got involved in the lie has to protect the lie, don't they? Because none of them can admit that they're a bullshitter.
Yeah.
Right. So then what happened with us was the lie went from the NHS to the local police force, because what we hadn't realised was back in 2001, and again I'm smiling here, but it makes my blood boil, the divisional commander for Cumbria Police was on the board of the NHS Trust.
Right.
Nobody told us that at the time, right? Nobody said that to us. Can you imagine being those two coppers that are tasked with doing that investigation, right? Oh, this bloke called Tom Bell's been on, and he thinks something untoward happened at the local mental health trust. The one that the governor's on the board of.
Yeah.
Ah, right, okay. That's a career terminal move, if ever there was one, yeah?
Yeah.
So there's a nod and a wink, and they drop the investigation. So all of a sudden, you've gone from this one stupid man making a stupid, if human, human, but stupid error, to an organisational cover-up, then a cover-up that spans two organisations, then the CPS get involved and they can't admit that they dropped the ball during the first investigation, so they don't want their incompetence coming out at a second go, yeah?
Yeah.
So but you've got these three and then the care quality commissions in the background, right? The number of organisations you've got, and then you've got the Independent Office for Police Complaints desperately trying to cover up stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, and it becomes, in Clint Eastwood terms, Graham, it becomes a clusterfuck.
Yeah.
And you're just left in the middle of it thinking, and I'm paying for this.
Yeah.
I'm paying for this.
Yeah.
And that's just, in my spare time, one of the things I do is I run this website called Humanity and Integrity in Public Sector Services, hipss.org.uk. And I realise that people will drop the ball. I'm not vindictive towards the people that have wronged us. I just want to understand. That's, because I think improvement begins with understanding. It's really easy to sit on the sidelines and say, you're all a bunch of bastards, and you should all be sacked. That's not the solution, right? There must be a reason why the cultures are creating these behaviours. And so we need to understand that. And we need to get underneath it and say, look, let's create room for well-intentioned mistakes. Yeah, let's do that, right? Let's not haul people over the coals if they do the wrong prescription or make an error in the paperwork or submit a police report incorrectly or the CPS, do you know what I mean? Or somebody in the CPS lies. It's what happens afterwards, isn't it, that then grows and grows. And it's, we're in the territory of targets and reputation management. And the cultures that are in our public services right now, as I say, they will take a generation to change, because the turkeys aren't going to vote for Christmas. And change isn't, I mean, we're a pair of grey-haired old blokes, aren't we? I mean, you're probably a bit younger than I am, Graham, but our generation, there's very few people. I mean, I'm 54 next birthday, right? There aren't many people at the age of 50 who would turn their back on a career because their moral compass told them to do so. That's not a mark of me being courageous. It's just something I had to do. Yeah, I had no choice in that. So I'm not a brave or a courageous person, but I had no choice. I couldn't turn a blind eye to what I was seeing, because it wasn't. I couldn't do it. It wasn't me. And that's been shaped by my experiences. But the vast majority of people who don't have those experiences as a backdrop, they're not going to give up a career, are they? A well-paid career at the age of 50, where they've got the pension in sight. Change is going to have to come from a younger generation. People who. But we need to fundamentally rethink our relationship with public services. And I know that sounds like one of those sweeping statements, but there's that lack of accountability. We have companies listed on the FTSE 500 who are more transparent in their dealings with their shareholders than our public services are in their dealings with us. That's wrong, because we're paying for them. And importantly, we have no choice about whether or not we pay for them.
Yeah. And you've documented this all in the book. The title of the book again, Tom, if people wanted to get more about your particular story, which it turns out exposes all the different issues within public services, but there's also your experience too. It's a cracking read. It is a really good book. What's it called?
Thank you, Graham. It's Lions, Liars, Donkeys and Penguins, The Killing of Alison. It's available in a Kindle, in paperback and in an audio version. I have to say I've had some great reviews and some lovely people reviewing it, and some fabulous feedback from people such as yourself, Graham. And it is raw. It's not easy reading. It's not bedtime reading, but there is. I was going to say there's a message of hope in at the end of it, but that would sound glib. Do you know what I mean? It's not,
because you don't have justice yet.
We don't have justice yet. We don't. And people talk to me about closure and say things like, "Oh, you need to get just." You don't get closure. Closure's a myth. I've been, as I say, I'm like one of those kintsugi plates. I've been broken and reshaped, and I'm okay with that. But I remember going through counselling. No surprise there. I had to pay for it, by the way, private sector, because I couldn't get on the waiting list for the NHS. But so I go through this counselling, right, and I've got this very well-meaning lady who's telling me that we're going to get back to you. We're going to get you back to you, to the you that you were. And I have to say to her, I just said, you're not. It ain't going to happen. I said, because I've been changed. I've been shaped. I've been changed beyond anything that I could have imagined. But I've been changed by circumstance. You're not going to get me back to that shiny, happy person that used to believe the best in everything. I've had a severe reality check, and that doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't, but it does make me a very different person. And do you know what the biggest challenge for me, Graham, was accepting myself for that, because I wanted to get the old me back. I wanted to, I was the ex-brewery rep that used to go around the working men's clubs telling them jokes, flogging them beer, taking them to the races. That's not, you know what I mean? That isn't going to happen anymore. You change, and the biggest challenge is to accept yourself for that, because just be unapologetic about it to yourself and to everybody else. I am the way I am for a reason, but I am desperately trying to make positives out of this. I'm trying to turn the lemons into lemonade, because I think I've been given a worthy challenge. That's the way I try to look at it. Not an easy challenge, but a worthy challenge.
You've got the book. Sorry, you've got. So what were you going to say?
I'm just going to say, my goal really with the work that I do. So I do online webinars. I did a session recently to some students in America, which was great because again, those young, uncynical, untarnished minds, yeah. And for me, this is all about making public services better, not just better for the people they serve, but better for the people that work in them, because those two things are inextricably linked. You won't get one without the other. The reason that we are hemorrhaging staff from our healthcare services is because they are not looked after, they are not managed well, they are not motivated well, and they're not treated well. And until we get good treatment of our staff on the one side, we won't get good treatment of our patients on the other.
Yeah. Okay. So you've got the book, which tells your story and touches on all these issues. You've got the website. What's the address of the website again?
hipss.org.uk. That's Humanity and Integrity in Public Sector Services. So it's hips with two s's.org.uk. And then I also have an online training course, which I released last month, which is available on the Teachable and the Udemy platforms.
And what's that called? You just look for Tom Bell on there, or is there a...
It's called Willful Blindness and Trust at Work. Willful Blindness and Trust at Work. I mean, people can get in touch with me on Twitter, Tom in Cumbria. They can email me through the HIPS website. One of the things I enjoy doing is talking to people with experiences. People I particularly like to talk to, the people that don't agree with me, because I think you can learn a bit from them. Do you know what I mean? It's really easy when you go on social media to get into this echo chamber, isn't it? Just agreeing with the people that agree with you, and patting each other on the back. But as I say, I think improvement begins with understanding. So I like this idea that we have these conversations where people can explain that, this is why they behave the way they behave. And I think that's interesting.
And you've also got the podcast.
I do. I have Tom's 5 Minute Friday podcast, because if people have a face for radio, then I have a voice for telly. And so I can't, I get quite monotone when I'm on the podcast, which is a bit, I just need maybe to work a bit better at that. So I kind of figured that people didn't deserve to be exposed to more than 5 minutes of me at a time. And so I just make time each Friday to do a quick 5 Minute Friday podcast on something that I think is important to me. And I think you can get that on Spotify. It's on the Apple platform. It's on the Google platform. But yeah, it's about spreading awareness and spreading that message.
Well, Tom, it's been great to talk to you again, and hopefully you've inspired some people to help make a change in this. But it is a big change you're asking for in Britain's public service. That you're talking about taking apart the structure and rebuilding it. It's like the old joke about, was it someone asking for directions or somebody said, "Oh, I wouldn't start from here," or something. You know what I mean? It's the job is that big. So best of luck. What can people do then? Can they put pressure on their own NHSs and police forces, and or is it about demanding? What can people do?
Job number one is take off your rose-coloured glasses, right? If you're unaware that there's a problem, then you may well be part of it. Yeah. Don't believe the PR, and don't become a conspiracy theorist. Don't think that everybody's out to get you. They're not. These things are happening for logical reasons. There is no conspiracy behind the way that we're being treated with public services. The way that we are dealt with by public services is a natural result of the way they are structured, what they are measured on, and the cultures that exist within them. So just make time to listen to stories from people that you might not normally listen to. Have a look around and realize that when we talk about the NHS, the only reason I want the NHS to change is because I love it. We get passionate about the things that we love. Yeah. If I didn't care about it, who cares? I'd say privatize. Let's do that. But I don't believe that. As I say, I think the NHS represents the best of what it can be to be human, not just British. So let's have conversations about how we can make the best of it and stop brushing the problems under the carpet, because they're not going to go away if we don't talk about them. They're there. And sorry, go on.
No, go on. Have you got some final? Because we're just wrapping this up now, and I want to make sure we've got everything covered off and tucked in. And if you send me all the links to everything, to your website and everything, I'll put them in the recorded version of this. If you're watching this live, if you come back to it tomorrow and Tom sent me the links, I'll get them all in there for you. Or if you're watching the recorded version, they'll be in there now. Okay.
Fabulous. Well, I'll make sure I send you those. I guess the thing is, Imagine me a few years ago, right? I'm that grey-suited corporate guy, yeah? I believe in public services. I believe in the integrity of people, and trust is my default option, yeah? I never thought I would be that person that got thrown out and driven out the NHS for whistleblowing. I never thought I would become that person. I thought whistleblowers were troublemakers. You know, everything's good until it happens to you. That's what I would say. It's really difficult putting yourself into someone like my shoes, yeah, unless you're actually in them. And I wouldn't wish anyone to stand in my shoes. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. There's really no easy fixes here. But if people need to be aware that things aren't always what they seem. And it's our job as citizens to be a bit more proactive about what we want from our public services, yeah? They belong to us. We own them. They are our shareholders. We just need to be a bit more proactive about managing them. I guess that's kind of where I would come from, Graham.
Tom Bell, best of luck with the continued search for justice. And thanks for doing everything you do. Thanks for a great podcast and a great book. And continued success, because you are a success and you've successfully brought to light a lot of these things that we just don't know that are going on, or don't want to know that are going on, which is probably half of the battle. Thanks very much, Tom Bell.
Thank you, Graham. Cheers.